Welcome back to the Vision Alignment Show, where we talk so much about our core beliefs, our core values having to be aligned with our vision. Our vision can also be called our purpose. So that's why it's so important for us to all know what our core beliefs are and how they need to be aligned with our vision. Somebody that knows a lot about vision, someone knows about their core beliefs, their core values, is our guest today. Without any further ado, I want to bring him on. His name is Mr. Kelly Leonard, and I'm going to hit a button here, and I'm going to bring him on to the main stage just in a matter of seconds. Here we go. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Brian. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Kelly, tell me, when is your first recollection of knowing your vision?
Well, I think it's important, and this is something I learned fairly recently, that I don't think vision is a static thing, where that is one thing, and it evolves and changes and morphs as you age and get hopefully more wise. But really, it was in 2014 when I was co-writing my book, Yes And, which was our attempt to lay out basically the improv philosophy that has existed at Second City for decades, and how we bring that into other non-theatrical organizations, sometimes theatrical, but mostly not, to help them become more creative, more innovative. And a lot of that revolves around this yes and concept. So the vision, as I was sort of seeing it at the time, was yes and as a nudge towards not falling into do nothing behavior. The idea that you need to affirm and contribute in order to explore and heighten. And this is all about groups of people who are making something out of nothing. And the thing that sort of morphed for me over time was after writing the book, and I actually stepped down from a leadership role at Second City and ended up having to figure out what I wanted to do in this world, and ended up co-creating a program at the University of Chicago called the Second Science Project, which basically blended behavioral science and improvisation and vice versa. And then I started to have a whole other schema for understanding how all this stuff lines up. And where I sit today, if you talk about vision, is actually more reductive than all of that. For me, it's as simple as we don't do this alone. Any of it. We don't do any of this alone. And so anything that we're doing to impede human beings working together for a greater good is a negative. And this is, for anyone who's living in the United States of America, or probably the world in 2022, this is the problem we have right now, which is we can't seem to find our way to work with people. And we keep putting them in these categories, and it's all of us are doing this. That doesn't belong to one sort of political bent. Everyone's doing it, and it's really especially affecting to young people. My wife is a college professor. I work with a lot of young people, and they are hurting for a variety of reasons, and many of which are quite valid. But one of them too is this sort of lack of hope, because they're looking at this sort of fractured place we live in. So my mantra over and over again is we don't do this alone.
Wow. If you want to hear more, stay right there. don't do this alone. I love it. That's good.
Yeah, it's we're there was a. Can I tell you a quick story?
Yeah.
One of the very first days that we were working on the Second Science Project, and what we would do is we had a lab on campus at the Booth School of Business, and various professors who were affiliated would come in, and we had a small group of improvisers who were also teachers and directors. And we jam on ideas, and sometimes it would be existing literature and finding improv exercises that would help work in line. And one of them, of course, is yes and, because the literature we were handed was from Richard Thaler, who at that time, he's the guy who greenlit the program. He's a Nobel Prize winner. And in his line of behavioral economics, he has shown that people's default position is to do no or say no or do nothing. So yes and is literally a nudge to not do that, to move in the opposite direction. And we did the exercise. It's a 3-part exercise that we did with the scientists, and they were like, great, yeah, we have existing literature. We could actually work this into an executive education program, which you did. And then they asked a really provocative question, which is, well, what if you're in a place where you really can't yes and the person across from you because you fundamentally don't agree with them? How do you stay inside a conversation if you fundamentally disagree with someone? And we didn't know, and they didn't know, but through looking at some of the existing literature and then us basically improvising in our lab, we discovered this what essentially a 4th pillar of yes and. So when we do the exercise yes and, we have people say no to each other, say yes but, and then do yes and. And yes and is always the best. It's the best way of getting to an abundant amount of ideas. So what we discovered is, if you fundamentally disagree with someone, but you need to stay inside the conversation, what you say is thank you because. And the idea here is, by thanking someone for their information, you're setting off the gratitude part of the brain. There's no fight or flight. And then the because is, you have to find something, no matter how small, that you agree with or identify with, so that this person feels seen or heard. So the example I always use is, my daughter got ill, and she had a friend whose parents were anti-vax well before this was fashionable. This is like 5 years ago. We wanted the girls to be able to stay in touch. And so my thank you because with them was, I said, thank you because you love your girl so much, you don't want her to be hurt by these vaccines. I love my girl so much, I don't want her to be hurt if someone's not vaccinated. So we care about the same thing. And that allowed the girls to text and FaceTime and do all these sorts of things. And it didn't become a big issue where we blew up this friendship. I give these talks a lot around the country, and this central idea, this sort of thank you because, seems to resonate the most with people. I think because they just feel it's in such decline in society today.
Well, that's a different take on things, and never had considered that. But I love that. Thank you, because you've created a new neural pathway for me to understand something I hadn't thought of before. We think so much in our day-to-day jobs as, this is what I need to do, and I need to do this block from here to here. But you have really expanded my thinking. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think it's look, I have the benefit. I took over producing Second City in 1992 when I was 26 years old. I had no one taught me anything. I had no training for anything. And I'm very lucky because the sort of artistic process that started with Second City in 1959 was the same. It's the same as it is today. And that it is almost a complete mapping to a successful innovation process is how we put together shows. It's why we've been so successful for so many years. And I led the theater for many years, making a lot of mistakes and doing some good stuff. And then the benefit of being older, and I host this podcast, so I read at least one, if not two books a week, and I interview these people, and that's completing a bit of a learning loop, right? So the learning loop is where you digest information, but if you really want to use it, you then have to spit it back to someone, in this case, an author, and then you have this dialogue, and you add whatever into your toolbox. So both honing my understanding of the work that we do at Second City and growing that, adding in the science, and then talking to other behavioral scientists or neuroscience or scientists or leaders or artists, all of that together, is growth. And we shouldn't ever stop growing. And I think one of the problems that I see in the workplace is we have really terrible metaphors, like climbing the corporate ladder. Like, well, what happens when you're at the top rung of that ladder? You done? You're not done. You shouldn't be done.
Right.
And there's a terrific author named Annie Murphy Paul. She's got a book called The Extended Mind, which just blew me away. And she talks about this, is that, our using of metaphors like for thinking like a computer, like our brains like a computer. It's not. A computer operates the same outside as it does inside. Our brains don't. Different things happen when we are next to humans. Our brain works differently when we're outside in nature. And so we're sort of trapped inside these metaphors, and a lot of which, especially like I like the work of Carol Dweck and a growth mindset, but there's also a suggestion when people use that term of if you just push hard enough, you're going to grow. And that's not the way it works. Our bodies have a say, our environments have a say, the people we surround us with have a say. And so I think my sort of right now, when I look at the 5-10 year arc of where I'm going, it's like flood the world with better metaphors.
Okay. So what metaphors would you say are better?
Well, in addition to things like thank you, because I think a place I'm really focused right now is that we disregard how our bodies are informing the way we think and sense the world. Nick Epley is a scientist that we work with at the University of Chicago, and a lot of his research is about how we get it wrong most of the time. So in our interactions with other humans, his research shows that we're probably getting it right 20% of the time. If it's someone we're really close with, maybe 30% of the time. And while people might be astounded to think that they're getting it wrong 70% of the time, there's other models that show us that kind of makes sense. An example I use is if you're a major league hitter and you're missing, you're not hitting the ball 70% of the time, you're a 300 hitter, which is considered very good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So look, if you can understand that we're mostly getting it wrong, then you're going to enter the room with less blame and more curiosity. So walking through the world curious first, to me, is a much better way to hopefully get better information, more true sense of what's going on, and then being able to take that with other humans and make a world that is better. I mean, the level at which we disregard the science that we have around whether it's extroverts and introverts, whether it's women or men as leaders, the way our educational systems are set up with testing. It's like that doesn't show you if someone's like getting wise. It's that right. There's zero correlation between people who are good at test taking and how successful they are in life, whether it's in work or the Grant study at Harvard, which is the oldest study that they've done. They studied a group of men, and they're all in their 80s now. So many are starting to die, but they have studied them since they were young people, and they have found one thing as a predictor of happiness in life, and that is our connections to other human beings. One thing. And those people are happier, and they earned more. They were considered more successful because they maintained a lot of relationships. And for me, I've been through a lot of hard stuff, and the things that have gotten me, the thing that has gotten me through, are my relationships to other people, and them holding me up when I was down.
Yeah. So you said a lot of relationships. I mean, is it a lot of relationships, or is it a few relationships a lot deeper?
It is. Yeah, it doesn't need to be a ton of relationships, but it is many relationships with a level of depth. There's a professor. I got to remember his name. He's from the University of Michigan, the Ross School of Business, and he talks about you have strong ties, you have weak ties, and you have dormant ties. And he says, like, you don't really need to work on the strong ties. They're strong for a reason. And he goes, you actually don't have to work that much on the weak ties as long as you're kind of like in touch occasionally with someone. That's good. He said the interesting thing is people with their dormant ties tend to feel like, well, if I haven't talked to this person like 3-4 years, I'm not going to call them. But the research shows it's the opposite. And this totally happened to me during COVID. So I had a friend who ran like entertainment for Virgin Hotels. And we had done some work when my book came out in 2015. I haven't talked to him since then. COVID comes down. I'm trying to figure out, like, what are we doing? How are we pivoting? And I'm just calling anyone I know. And I'm like, I'm going to call Blake. And I leave a message for Blake. And he's like, I'm thrilled to hear from you. And then we just completely rebuilt a relationship now. He's at the Ravinia Festival now, and we're doing a swap for groups. And it's
that's awesome.
Yeah. So recognizing too that just because you haven't talked to someone in a few years, or you might feel reluctant. Don't be. People actually do want to talk to other people.
I find that amazing because even new relationships like you and I, we've never known each other before, but the fact that we got together and you were receptive enough to have a conversation with me, and I want to do more with you. I want to be able to have a further relationship, and hopefully we can do that. So I am one of those guys who loves to have those relationships where, I can call somebody that I haven't seen in 10 years and just have a conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's important too that the yin and the yang of this is one wants to also be aware of their boundaries. So I've learned, for the guy who wrote the Yes and book, I have learned a lot in recent years about saying no and knowing when to do that. But one thing I don't say no to usually is an initial conversation. To me, that's let's see what happens. And then you figure out your time moving forward, because for all of us too, our time is limited, and the only thing we really have is where we choose to put our attention, right? And so, like, trying to make sure that we're placing our attention in places that are net positive for ourselves and others is hard. Because we get to, especially in the sort of the interconnected social media world we live in, it is so easy to let our attention drift into. Like, I got on TikTok for like a hot second and I deleted the app.
Me too.
I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm already giving away too much to Twitter.
It sucks so much out of you.
Yep. But that's where so many young people are living, and one has to, if that's going to be a reality, that a lot of humanity is on there. I hope there are other people who are on there who are trying to figure out how to make it healthier.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I hope so. And there's so much to gain. And yeah, I hear what you're saying when it comes to, getting stuck in your own head. I mean, maybe this is not what you said, but this is what I heard. Getting stuck in your own head. What's in it for me? What am I going to do with this? How am I going to make my business better? All those things, instead of just having a conversation and seeing where it leads us.
Yeah. Well, and this is so core to improvisation, in the things we teach, which is, to successfully make something out of nothing, which is basically what any of us working in any level of business are doing. And it's what we do in our lives. You need other people. And the philosophy we have is your job is to enter the room making your partner look good. If you can focus on making your partner look good, and they will reciprocate, and then great things can happen, especially if you don't live in early no's. So the yes and concept is all about the beginning. It's about the beginning of any project. There is tons of no that is going to come as you sort of refine and innovate. But it's just making sure you're not tripping up at the beginning by not showing up, and then also not showing up uncurious, and then allowing for, we have a phrase, bring a brick, not a cathedral. Walk in the room with your brick. Don't walk with your cathedral. You don't know if it's going to end up being a church or a cathedral or a mosque. It could be any of those things. When different people put things together, it's a very funny thing I run up against with my academic friends, which is there's a lot of literature around ineffective brainstorming. and that groups aren't good at doing things, and you should do sole work. And this is very big in the tech industry. And it's always hilarious to me because like none of you cats are doing any of this by yourself. Like I get that you're in a room, but at a certain point, you've needed someone else to have made a thing that you're working with. Everything is a pastiche. And then someone had to come in and mark you. None of you did this by yourself in any regard. Even if we're working alone, we're working with some materials that someone else gave us.
Right.
So that you know, and again, like not that independent creative work isn't important for fueling you, especially if you tend to be on the introvert scale. But introverts work with other people. They do.
Wow. Yeah, that makes me think a lot about. Again, it puts me in my own head, my own thinking. You know, I think about the conference, the retreats that I'm working on in order to help people to build their leadership skills. And you talked a little bit about this earlier in some books that you have that you're reading, and I think how important that is to understand. You know, maybe it's not understand, but maybe it's just to really get a identification with that. I don't know, just getting a better understanding of where you are in the world with that. I mean, whether it's a yes and, or whether it's a thank you because, or whatever it is. Just, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here.
Well, I think what you're getting at is what makes an effective leader and what makes effective leadership.
Right.
And the study that I was referring to before we hopped on is a book called The Brain Friendly Workplace by a neuroscientist. And I was just reading up on this study that we wildly over support people who are extroverts as leaders. And under support people who are introverts, because we feel like the people who talk the most are going to be the best. And there's no correlation between that and actual competence. And so one of and I've seen this throughout my career, it's why most CEOs are over 6 feet tall. Like, what does that have to do with anything except, it's getting back to the metaphors, it's that we see a tall white man, cisgender white man, as being leader. This is what we saw in our movies. It's what we saw when we were, watching television, and it's drilled in there. And there's there's a great book about why men are ineffective leaders by a scientist that I had on my podcast, and it's just on many facets. Women are better leaders, and I know throughout my career, my most effective leaders were women across the board. And it's not that men can't be a good leader, but it's often our lack of empathy. And this is the deal about leadership. It's like, if you are a leader inside an organization, your job is to make your people who work for you operate at peak performance. If you do that, you should be in good shape. There's other stuff you're doing, but really it's about, how do I make my people be able to perform the best they can possibly. And so what we know about peak performers is they get rest, that they have a sense of psychological safety, that they take risks that are supported, that they try new things, and that's how they get to be both creative and innovative. But that requires mess. You want people to be doing good work. They're going to mess up because they're trying a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And how many businesses create spaces for mess?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that sounds like improv.
Improv does, sure.
I mean, that sounds exactly like improv. Everything you just described in there, the mess, the failures, all that stuff that they have to go through, it's improv.
Yep. I mean, that's why this is such a powerful tool. I mean, because it really, I often say, if you're looking at improvisation when we're just doing it and not necessarily trying to create a piece of theater or comedy, it's human being practice. It is basically attacking all the different ways and obstacles that get in between humans to effectively collaborate. Do you know? I don't know if you know the origin story of where all this sort of philosophy stuff came from.
No.
But it was a woman in the 20s and 30s by the name of Viola Spolin, and she was a social worker working at Jane Addams Hull House in the south side of Chicago. And her job, Viola
Spolin.
And her job was to better assimilate the immigrant children coming into her care. So what she did was she helped develop all these exercises and games, many of which were in silence or gibberish because the kids didn't always share language. But what they did was when they played these games, they found a way to collaborate and empathize and communicate in sort of deep ways. Her son, Paul Sills, was studying at the University of Chicago. He loved these games. He taught them to his friends, Mike Nichols and Elaine May, among others. And they formed the first improvisational theater in America in 1957 called the Compass Players. And that morphed into the Second City in 1959. So the origin story is social work.
Huh. That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Origin story is social work. I love it. I'm taking notes here. You get so much good information and so many good books. I mean, I've filled my page up here with books to read and books to look into, and it's phenomenal. So, wow, you're a wealth of knowledge.
Well, again, I mean, it's like my job. Literally, part of my job is to read a book or two a week and interview an author, and I love it. It's and actually. It's funny when we started working at the University of Chicago, there's a thing that academics often talk about is me search, that a lot of them go into their line of study because it's some phenomenon they're curious about themselves. And my friend Heather Caruso, who I co-led the program with, had said to me that there is this evidence out there that as you age in your job, if you stay the same route, essentially, that you're doing, you'll probably have some level of success, but you're going to be less happy. Because you're going to just be doing the same thing over and over again. And there's compelling research that if you can find something adjacent to your expertise as you get older, that will push you in a way of being happier. That's exactly what I was able to do. I was able to take my foundational experience, the place I work, the stuff I do, but shift it over into this other level of inquiry. And it is fundamentally changed my life in a way that I'm like, no one, like again, our metaphors, no one tells us that we continue to grow, that we have permission to grow and change, especially when we're sort of seen as a thing or a very specific kind of thing. And so the gift that I was given, because it was very accidental, was sort of finding myself in this new world. And then I think, a habit of mine, and that's very ingrained because improvisation is I play the scene that I'm in, not the scene I want to be in. So I'm in the scene, I'm going to play it, whatever it is. And this happened to be with some academics. This happened to be, the podcast was accidental. We had a fire at Second City. My office was destroyed. I lost everything that I'd had. We ended up doing temporary offices in the Tribune Tower where WGN Radio used to be, where my dad worked for 30 years. So I know a bunch of those people. Literally run into the program director in a hallway with my boss. We go up to his office. I leave with a podcast. That's Second City and WGN Radio. And it was a chance meeting. I didn't even listen to podcasts at that point in my life. So, but I remain open to what is in front of me, and not afraid to sort of yes and an opportunity, like let's try it. And if we and then what else can come from this? And one of the things that's happened with the podcast is I meet these really smart, interesting people, and we end up wanting to do more stuff together. So a great example of this is I had on Kim Scott, who wrote the fantastic book Radical Candor. We hit it off. Like 2 years later, we're creating improvising radical candor workshops. We're creating an improvising radical candor video series. We've combined these two worlds of improvisation and radical candor in ways that, like, alone, it would never happen. The only way it happened was by us sort of jumping in and seeing if the world wanted it, and they did.
That's incredible. Radical candor. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so Kim's has a long history in Silicon Valley, and she developed this idea around feedback, which is crucial. And she has quadrants of you want radical candor. The opposite of radical candor is obnoxious aggression. So radical candor is not being a jerk. It's when you are, let's say your employee knows that you care for them personally, you can be honest with them. And you do it in all sorts of supportive ways, but you are honest with them. But it's like anything, it's a spectrum. And there's her grid includes a bunch of different things of ways. Pardon me, it's like okay. I recently had COVID. I'm better now.
Okay, good.
I made it almost like 3 years without this thing, and then it came to me. But yeah, so there's all different ways that we are candid or not candid with human beings. But the key is not just us knowing we care for them. They need to know that we care for them, and that means you show up for people, and that means you're not afraid to talk to people. And then asking a lot of questions. I referenced Nick Epley earlier in his work at the University of Chicago, and what he's got studies around our unwillingness to self-disclose. Like human beings, like just tend to not want to tell or think that other people don't care about the details of life. When the opposite is completely true, and you can even share mundane things about your life and make discoveries and connections.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, my story is one I've told so many times, and I think people look at me and they're like, well, he doesn't really value his story, or they think, I don't really care about my story. I don't really care about his story, and I don't care about my story. I just want to, do this transaction. I think that sometimes that notion creeps into my head at times, and if I can get that notion out of my head, I'd be much better off.
That's right. And we all do. I mean, like imposter syndrome is a real thing. I'm married to an academic. I read a lot. She reads more. She's smarter than I am. I'm very good at communicating. That's always a skill I had. My dad was a communicator. Like that is, I know I'm very, very good at that. And I'm more of an extrovert than she is, but like she's the brains of the outfit, and anyone who knows us knows that. And that's fine. Like we all have our stories. We all have the things we're good at and the things that we're not good at. But the one thing that I think ties together all of humanity is that, our stories are our stories, and we are human beings are storytelling machines. That is how we perceive the world. That is how we come up with our cultural philosophy, our political philosophy, you name it. And, we walk through the world based on the stories we tell ourselves, many of which are incorrect. So trying to get as correct as you can, I think, is pretty crucial if you want to be effective.
But if we sit on our stories, then that's a terrible thing to have happen, because then they don't live on without us.
Yeah, and we can do very damaging things if we are telling ourselves a certain kind of story. Again, I talked earlier about where we put our attention, and this came from I'm interviewing this guy in a couple of weeks, Dandapani, who was a Tibetan monk for 10 years.
Really?
And now he's an entrepreneur. And he talks about how we get our mind, a way we misperceive or misunderstand our minds. He says, you think of the mind as a mansion with many, many rooms. And then our awareness is like a glowing orb that can only be in one of those rooms at any given time. It can't be in both those rooms. And when the orb is in that room, there's energy. So where you're putting your attention is going to be the place that you're putting your energy.
Right.
And if you change that metaphor to like a garden, where you're watering and where you're not. So what's growing and what's not. It was a very powerful metaphor for me, because I was like, I get that. If I choose to put my attention in every mistake, embarrassment, or shame-ridden moment, and I know people who do this, you are just building that up. You are building that up. Yeah. However, if I choose to put my attention in places of love, support, wisdom, learning, that's going to become really, really powerful. That's where the energy is going. So like, we got to work hard at this stuff. This is the thing. It is not, we're wired differently. we are wired to be running from fear, and finding our tribe so that we're not going to be hurt by others. That's what we're stuck with for another couple hundred years. So that means you have to build practices in order to do better.
I love this topic. I love what we're saying here. Unfortunately, we have blown the doors off of our 30-minute show.
Leave them wanting more.
Our attention has been so focused on how we can take the next step forward. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's something else. But I think that I think there's something here. We need to continue to have this conversation. If you'd be willing to come back on, I'd love to have you back on, and we can do this. So, what do you think?
Yep, for sure.
All right, awesome. And I haven't even said hello to all of the audience that's out there. Hello, everyone. If you're listening on live, put in the hashtag live. If you're listening on replay, put in hashtag replay. Tell us any comments you have, any questions you have. Do all that. We'll come back and we'll make sure that we have a further conversation when the time is right. Kelly, is there one thing you would leave our audience with here today?
No, because it's never one thing. So I guess the thing I'm leaving you with is like anyone who's peddling the 7-point path to X, or that this philosophy is the there may be kernels of truth and good stuff in there, but like a toolbox can never have all the tools. So beware the gurus, beware the thought leaders. And I hate it when people call me that, because it's like I've collected a lot of other people's wisdom. Very little of it is my own. So that it is like source out, listen to a bunch of different people. There's a Carl Weick is, I think, the guy who's credited with this, but Dan Pink said it to me, which is you need to fight like you're right and listen like you're wrong.
I love it.
Yep.
Mic drop. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you so much.
For having me back on. I'm going to put you in the green room, or you're going to go to the green room, and I will see you later. I'll close the show, and I'll see you in a minute. All right. Take care, Kelly. Thanks. Oh, wow. My head hurts. That's a lot. It's a lot of mind melding, mind numbing, just a lot to take in. So I'm amazed. I'm definitely going to go back and listen to this podcast again myself. So if you want to listen to it again, go ahead and do that. If you want to have a recording of it, let me know. I'll send it to you. But just remember that, as always, to keep one eye on the road and be good. Have a great day, and I'll see you next week, next Monday.